She was just another passenger on a routine flight, tucked away quietly in seat 1-F. To the people around her, she seemed ordinary, calm, collected, and simply another traveler passing the time as the engines roared and the clouds rolled by outside the window. No one on board knew her name. No one knew her past, and no one could have guessed the weight of the story she carried with her. But fate has a way of revealing truths in the most unexpected moments. What happened next turned an ordinary flight into a memory every passenger would never forget. It began with a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Two men in crisp Air Force uniforms walked down the aisle, laughing softly at an inside joke only they understood. Fighter pilots, sharp, disciplined, and used to being the ones who commanded attention wherever they went. Yet the moment their eyes landed on her, their expressions changed. The easy smiles vanished, replaced by something rare, something heavy with recognition. Their steps slowed, and then, in the middle of a crowded commercial cabin, they stopped. The woman in 12F didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The slight movement of her hand as she adjusted her bag revealed just enough an insignia. A patch, a piece of her history that spoke louder than words ever could. In that instant, the two fighter pilots stiffened, shoulders squared, and without hesitation, they stood at attention. The passengers around them froze, confused, whispering, trying to piece together what they were seeing. Why were these elite pilots suddenly paying respect to a woman who, moments ago, had seemed like no one special? The cabin fell into silence, broken only by the steady hum of the engines. All eyes turned to the woman in 12F, who sat as if she'd been expecting this all along. She carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken but is impossible to ignore. Who was she? What was her call sign, the name that could make even F-22 pilots stand to attention at 30,000 feet? The answers lay just ahead, in a story far bigger than a seat number on a flight. Whispers rippled through the cabin as the two fighter pilots remained frozen in place, eyes locked on the woman in seat 1-F. Some passengers leaned over their armrests, straining to catch a glimpse of what had caused such a sudden change in the pilot's demeanor. Others exchanged puzzled looks, wondering if they were witnessing some kind of protocol or secret tradition they could never fully understand. Still, the woman herself didn't move. Her calm expression seemed almost out of place in the growing tension that spread through the aircraft. The patch on her bag wasn't something most people would recognize. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than an old piece of fabric stitched with symbols. But to those who had worn a flight suit and heard the roar of jet engines from inside a cockpit, it spoke volumes. It wasn't just a patch. It was a call sign, one earned through sweat, fire, and a history written in the skies. And though no one said her name aloud, the pilots clearly knew it. Their rigid posture, their silence, and the respect in their eyes told the rest of the story. Passengers began to murmur, questions hanging in the air. Who could she be? Was she a commander? A decorated pilot? A war hero whose legend lived only within the close-knit world of the Air Force? The cabin crew looked equally uncertain, glancing nervously toward the scene as if waiting for some kind of explanation. But none came. The woman in 12F remained quiet, her eyes fixed on the view outside the window where the clouds drifted endlessly by. It was in that quiet moment that the mystery deepened. She hadn't asked for attention, yet it found her anyway. And for the first time, everyone on board began to realize that this was no ordinary flight. It was the beginning of a story no one would forget. The silence in the cabin seemed heavier with each passing second. The two fighter pilots stood motionless, their posture sharp, their eyes never leaving the woman in seat 1-F. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something important was unfolding before them, though none of them could put the pieces together. The woman herself gave nothing away. She simply adjusted the strap of her bag, her movements calm, steady, almost deliberate. As though she had done this countless times before. For those who lived outside the world of aviation, her presence meant nothing unusual. But for the pilots, that call sign stitched onto her patch carried a weight far greater than any rank or medal. It was more than a name, it was a story etched into the history of flight, whispered about in hangars, remembered in flight schools, and spoken with reverence by those who understood. Not everyone earned a call sign like hers, and fewer still carried it with the kind of quiet authority she did now. The passengers around her could feel it, even if they didn't understand why. A mother holding her child leaned forward to get a better look, while a businessman across the aisle tapped nervously at his phone, trying to distract himself from the unease in the air. Even the flight attendants, usually composed and professional, moved with hesitation, unsure of whether to break the moment or simply let it unfold. The woman never once looked back at the men standing in the aisle. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on the horizon beyond the glass, where the sky stretched endlessly. She didn't need to prove who she was. The recognition in the pilot's eyes said everything. Yet for the rest of the passengers, the mystery only deepened. Who was she really, and what history did she carry that could make even the most fearless pilots stand at attention? The hum of the engines filled the silence, but inside the cabin the tension was almost unbearable. Every eye was drawn toward seat 12F, as though the quiet woman had somehow become the center of gravity on the entire flight. The two F-22 pilots hadn't moved, their shoulders squared, their eyes locked on her patch as if the stitched fabric held the weight of an entire history. It was the kind of silence that made people whisper, though no one dared speak loud enough to break the moment. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some leaned into the aisle to catch a better view, while others clutched their phones, uncertain whether this was something extraordinary or something they weren't supposed to see. The crew tried to keep moving, serving drinks with forced smiles. But their steps slowed each time they passed row 12. Even without knowing the details, everyone on board felt an unspoken tension, the kind that only comes when something greater than the ordinary is unfolding. The woman in 12F sat steady, her posture upright, her eyes still set on the clouds beyond the window. But there was something in her stillness that only deepened the mystery. It wasn't indifference, it was certainty. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced storms before. Someone who knew the sky not as a passenger, but as a part of her own story. Then, almost as if on cue, shadows flickered across the windows. Gasps echoed through the cabin as sleek shapes appeared outside 2F2, two Raptors sliding into formation beside the airliner, their metallic wings glinting in the sunlight. The passengers pressed to the glass in disbelief, pointing, murmuring, their voices filled with awe and confusion. The fighter jets held their line, steady, powerful, almost ceremonial, and in that instant, every question only grew louder. Why were the Raptors here? What connection did they have to the woman in seat ERF? The air was thick with suspense, building toward a truth no one on that plane was prepared for. The passengers were already stunned by the sight of the F-22 Raptors outside their windows. But what happened next pushed the tension even higher. One of the jets suddenly broke formation, dipping low before climbing back up with a sharp maneuver that drew gasps across the cabin. It wasn't a display for the airline passengers, it was directed at her. The gesture was deliberate, precise, the kind of signal only someone with a deep understanding of military flight codes would recognize. To everyone else, it was breathtaking and confusing. To the woman in 12F, it was unmistakable. For the first time since the silence had fallen, she moved. Her hand rested on the insignia patch, brushing it gently as though acknowledging the unspoken message. The pilots standing in the aisle noticed instantly, their eyes flickering between her and the jets outside. Their rigid posture tightened even more, as if the moment carried weight beyond anything the passengers could imagine. The whispers grew louder. A young man leaned toward his neighbor, asking if this was some kind of escort, while an older passenger insisted it had to be an emergency. The theories swirled, but none of them came close to the truth. The woman's calm composure seemed to magnify the uncertainty. She knew something the rest of them didn't. And that only fueled the mystery. Then came the second shock. From the cockpit, the captain's voice broke through the intercom, his tone steady but oddly tense. He asked the passengers remain seated and calm, his words measured, almost rehearsed. But in that controlled announcement, there was a hesitation that didn't belong to routine instructions. The pilots outside weren't just a coincidence. And the captain clearly knew more than he was willing to say aloud. The stakes were no longer just about recognition or respect. Something larger was unfolding. Something tied directly to the woman in 12F. And as the Raptors held their place in the sky, the passengers realized this flight was carrying a story far bigger than anyone could have imagined. The cabin was still, buzzing with unease when the captain stepped out from the cockpit, something that rarely ever happened mid-flight.